with me and experience the greatest of pleasures.
So the God of War franchise has always been something I've quite enjoyed. The combat's been fun. I love the Greek mythology. There's just kind of a sense of just adult naughtiness that seems to surround the whole violent fantasy of it. What's odd about God of War Ascension, now the fourth proper console installment, is that we were first told about it through the multiplayer. And a lot of people, myself included, thought that this was really just a multiplayer game, maybe with a smattering of some single player in front of it. Well, I'm happy to tell you that is not the case. Oh yes, there is multiplayer, but this is a proper, full-bodied God of War game. There's one thing that's immediately obvious about God of War Ascension. It is a technically stunning game. This opening sequence with its swooping cameras, astonishing lighting, and textures is as sumptuous a visual experience you'll have in games. Unfortunately, the rest of the game lacks this level of aesthetic drama, and the visual palette begins to undermine the gameplay it should support. Ascension is a prequel to the main God of War trilogy. It details Kratos' breaking of his oath with Ares, which brings about the wrath of the three Furies who hunt him down and imprison him in the 100-armed Hecatoncheires where the game begins. The majority of the game is told in flashback, which does little to clarify a very muddled plot that struggles for clarity and robs Ascension of the urgency of the pure revenge story the previous games used to propel the action and give context to the extreme violence. That violence, far more lurid in Ascension than in the previous outings, is the visceral result of the core of the God of War series, the combat, which in Ascension has seen a significant change from previous games. Here you only have the Blades of Chaos, no other additional weapons, which I always found to be a distraction in the other games, as they are the most dynamic and pleasurable tools of carnage. What keeps the combat from feeling too restrictive are elemental modifications: fire, ice, lightning, and soul, all of which can be upgraded to open up new moves and magic attacks. Some of the elements open up slower, more powerful attacks, others allow for chaining, but all of the controls are universal to the base Blades moveset. This pared-down approach works well. The skills you learn with the Blades only improve throughout the game without getting sidetracked by a new weapon. But strong combat is only effective with well-designed combat scenarios. In this regard, Ascension is more of a mixed bag. The game is quite challenging and is more than willing to spawn many enemies, and from early on keeps you attuned to not mashing attacks on autopilot. Blocking and parrying are far more useful than in previous God of War games, and lend the action a more thoughtful, deliberate play mechanic. Similarly, the enemies are fun, but a lack of variety sets in quickly, and leaden pacing, exacerbated by the poor narrative, sets in for many of the game's sequences, converting the fun and anticipation of combat into something that feels more obligatory.
We have given you all you need for success, and yet you still fail us.
Another bigger issue is that the game's aesthetics frequently win out over the game design. As cool as the moving camera can be, it can pull so far out as to detach the player from the events on screen. Even more problematic is that the striking, cold, earthen tones in the visual design of locations and enemies makes it very easy to lose Kratos amidst the fray, given that the majority of the combat spaces are quite compact. The animations, while gorgeous, appear to take their time to resolve, opening up the player to enemy attacks that only facilitate successive attacks until you can break free and reassert yourself. This brings me to the section of game near the conclusion, which caused me great frustration and became the subject of this week's Sessler Something, the Trial of Archimedes. This is the last time you have traditional combat before the final boss battle. It's extremely difficult and loses the sense of fun rapidly. Moreover, the level of precision it's asking of the player only serves to highlight the foibles of the design quirks. Additionally, you cannot lower the difficulty mid-game as you have in all the previous God of War titles. Advanced players should be able to get past it. I apparently am not one, and I had to seek the assistance of a colleague to actually get past that sequence. Yeah, I think a lot of other more normal players will be similarly stymied by it, and it could be a stopping point completely. God of War Ascension does break up the combat with a healthy portion of puzzles, which are quite involved but also rather opaque, lacking any clear communication to the player of their logic. Platforming sequences are even more common, ranging from wall traversals to some truly frustrating moments where you need to react without any clear cue that a jump or a QuickTime event is forthcoming. In single-player, God of War Ascension has some strong moments, but can't maintain the spirit of those instances throughout and feels unrefined and elliptical. But the newest addition is the multiplayer, which is easily one of the most unique offerings for online play. Its closest corollary is the Dreamcast title, Power Stone, except this is far bloodier.
My fury surpasses the gods!
Your character chooses a god and serves in his favor through 4 modes, which cover the standard deathmatch, team deathmatch, and capture the flag, with Trial of the Gods serving as a co-op horde mode. It's remarkably fun and fast, with complex level design with random events and traps. It really feels like a fighting game with up to 8 players, and careful attention has been given to keeping the player visually informed about parries, blocks, and vulnerabilities of players. But in that benefit lies some of its limitations. Namely, it can become so chaotic that you cannot tell where you are or what is happening, especially when the camera pulls back. But especially when fighting 1 to 2 players, it is something fresh and truly invigorating. The diversity of upgrades with your experience shows a commitment to keep the player engaged, but I'm less certain that the multiplayer can withstand the expected level of devotion. The move set for multiplayer, while strong, is not as diverse as what you get in single player, and even in a small session for the review, I could start to feel a sameness in the play. Having said that, committed players playing with similarly interested players should find dividends in this rather successful gameplay experiment. There's one more depressingly unfortunate aspect of God of War Ascension. After the very best boss battle in the game, there's a cutscene which displays one of the most violent things I've ever seen in a video game. It's Kratos boot stomping a Fury's face in. While the image of a woman's face being kicked in is borderline, the overall dark nastiness of the franchise and its lack of gender roles outside of the famous sex scenes kept it just inside a tonal context. But following the conclusion of the cutscenes, you get a trophy. This one. Bros before hoes. This gut punch of misogyny irredeemably sours this game and is shocking that such a talented developer would traffic in such a contemptible attitude. I have always liked the adult fantasy of the God of War games, that grand Guignol silliness, and in this moment, it's all reduced to some frat house joke, making me ashamed that I ever thought it was more than that in the first place. God of War Ascension doesn't rise to the standards of the previous 3 console titles, but its technical accomplishments and several moments show real creativity and experimentation. It just doesn't always do it in the service of a good time. Maybe it's just for the bros, and they can have them. A 3 out of 5. Well, there you have it. I gotta say, this is a game I really wanted to like. I've loved all of the other God of War games. I was a little bit surprised that it just fell short in a lot of design aspects. Obviously, there was this one part that was very hard for me, but understand, that's a very small part of the game. It may even be addressed sometime down the road with a patch. I don't know. But overall, it was just the game itself just didn't really live up to a sense of a satisfying experience. And then there was that trophy, which really didn't need to be there. Anyhow, there's gonna be a lot of discussion coming off of this. Sony Games team tend to do that. I'll be checking in, responding here and there. While you're at it, go check out some other reviews. We have the incredibly opposite game called Baseball with MLB The Show 13. And always, subscribe, tell your friends to do it. youtube.com/Rev3Games.